Welcome to the Lazy CEO podcast, where Jim Schlexer, author of Great CEOs Are Lazy and founder of the CEO Project, features compelling experts and topics for CEOs of mid to large-size companies. Now, let's get started with the show.
Welcome, everybody, to another Lazy CEO podcast. My name is Jim Schlexer. I am your host and the founder of the CEO Project. Well, it's Christmas morning here at the Lazy CEO podcast. We have somebody whose work I have admired for quite a period of time. I probably personally sold 1,000 of her books with recommendations. We have Kim Scott, who's the author of Radical Candor and now more recently Radical Respect. She's the co-host of the Radical Candor podcast. She was a CEO coach at Dropbox, Qualtrics, Twitter, and other tech companies. She was a faculty member at Apple University, and before that led AdSense, YouTube, and DoubleClick teams at Google. So tremendous tech experience and experience with teams and effective teams. And we are going to learn so much today. So Kim, welcome.
Well, thank you. It's great to be here. I'm excited for our conversation.
Love it. Why don't we start with Radical Candor for a minute? Because your new book is Radical Respect, right?
Yes.
Okay, we're going to get to that. Don't worry about it.
All right, good.
But Radical Candor is really, I always loved the concept because it's the classic 4-box consulting grid. And you always want to be the upper right. Well, maybe you can just take us through the model a little bit, if you don't mind.
Sure. Yeah. I went to business school, and at business school, I learned exactly nothing about managing people. But I did learn that a good 2x2 framework will solve all of life's hardest
every
problems.
time. Yeah.
So here's your 2x2. On the vertical axis is care personally. On the horizontal axis is challenge directly. And when you can do both at the same time, that's Radical Candor. And you might ask, what is so radical about caring and challenging? They seem like kind of basic things, love and truth. Mm-hmm. But the fact of the matter is that most people, when it comes to feedback, they have a sense of existential dread. And I think part of the reason why is because of these things that happen in the other 3 quadrants. So let's walk through it. In the bottom right-hand quadrant, you have where you're challenging, but you're not showing that you care personally. You have obnoxious aggression. And in the first draft of the book, I called that the asshole quadrant because, I don't know, it seems more radically candid.
Would have been a different book name then.
Exactly. But I stopped doing that for a very important reason, not because of censorship of profanity, but because I found that when I did it, people would use this framework to start writing names in boxes.
Oh,
and
my gosh.
Beg of you, please don't use this framework
I got
way.
John, I got Mario, I got Marina,
This is not another Myers-Briggs personality test. So don't, I beg of you, don't use this framework that way. Think about the Radical Candor framework like a compass that will help guide specific conversations with specific people to a better place. Now, obnoxious aggression is a big problem. It's a problem because it hurts other people. It's also a problem because it's inefficient. If I'm a jerk to you, you're likely to go into fight or flight mode, and then you literally cannot hear what I'm saying, so I'm wasting my breath. But it's also a problem for a third, maybe more subtle reason, which is that, I don't know about you, Jim, but when I realize I've been a jerk, it's not my instinct actually to go the right way on care personally. Instead, it's my instinct to go the wrong way on challenge directly. Oh, it doesn't matter, it's no big deal. And then I wind up in the worst place of all, manipulative insincerity, when I'm neither caring nor challenging. If obnoxious aggression is front stabbing, manipulative insincerity is backstabbing. And that's where passive aggressive behavior, political behavior, all of the kinds of behaviors that erode trust most profoundly occur. And it's interesting, most of the drama is in these 2 quadrants, in obnoxious aggression and manipulative insincerity. In fact, the HBO show Silicon Valley did a whole episode on radical candor, but it was really about obnoxious aggression and manipulative
Right.
insincerity.
Yeah. They only
Yeah,
stayed in
because
two quadrants. That's a
yeah,
better story
yeah,
anyway,
yeah,
right?
yeah. It's a better story, and that's why we talk about them so much, because that's where the drama is. But these are not actually the mistakes that most people make most of the time. In fact, so much, part of the reason why I wrote this book is that so much of management training is aimed at preventing obnoxious aggression, which is a noble goal, but that's not the most common mistake. The vast majority of people make the vast majority of their mistakes in this last upper left-hand quadrant, where we do remember to show that we care personally, but we're so worried about not offending someone or not hurting someone's feelings that we fail to tell them something that they'd be better off knowing in the long run. And that's what I call ruinous empathy. And that's really what I wrote the book to help us avoid, because I do think most people are actually pretty nice people. And ruinous empathy, of course, is not so nice in the end, nor does it get good results.
Yeah. I always think of it as, I've got a sore, and if I don't deal with it, it's going to just fester.
Yeah,
As opposed
yes,
to expose it
exactly.
to sunlight and let's just clean it out and deal with
Yeah,
it. Might hurt a
yeah,
little bit, but then
yeah,
it'll be over with, right?
yeah, exactly.
And I tell people, radical candor is the broccoli in your teeth quadrant, right?
Yes,
Right.
exactly.
So if you had a
Yeah,
loved one and she or he had broccoli in their teeth, you'd tell them, wouldn't you? You go, well, yeah, of
yeah,
course I would. Well, that's it. That's radical
yeah.
candor.
Or even a perfect stranger. You know that the right thing to do is you're having lunch with someone for the very first time. It's a little more awkward than with someone you know well, but you know the right thing to do is to tell them, you know.
Right. So why do we stay in the lack of, being direct with people? Why do we do that? I mean, we have compassion, we love people, it's great,
Yeah,
but we won't confront directly. We won't say, "Hey, listen, that behavior is really problematic for
yeah,
XYZ reason." Why don't we do it? Because I think you're right. People
yeah.
don't, but why not?
Yeah, I think it's a combination. One of the reasons, and I'll tell you a story that kind of explains this better than an abstract explanation. But one of the reasons is that we really don't want to hurt their feelings. Truly ruinous empathy. But if we're honest with ourselves, very often there's something more insidious going on, which is manipulative insincerity. We're worried about our own reputation as a leader, and we don't want to get called a jerk. And that's manipulative insincerity. And those two behaviors often they're not mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive. Often
Right.
they messy, as McKinsey says, but they often go together. So you want a story? Can I lay a story?
Yeah, let's
on
do
you?
it.
All right.
Love stories.
This happened to me when I had co-founded a software company, and I had just hired this guy. We'll call him Bob. And I liked Bob a lot. He was smart. He was charming. He was funny. He would do stuff like we were at a manager offsite playing one of those endless get to know you games. And everybody was stressed out and kind of wanted to get back to work. And Bob was the guy who had the courage to raise his hand and to say, I could tell everybody's stressed out, wants to get back to work. I've got an idea. It'll help us get to know each other, and it'll be really fast. No matter what his idea was, if it was fast, that's what we were going to do.
Yeah.
So yeah, Bob says, let's go around the table and confess what candy our parents used when potty training us. Really weird, but really fast.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Weirder yet, everybody remembered Hershey Kisses right here. Just bought some in the airport. And then for the next 10 months, every time there was a tense moment in a meeting, Bob would pull out just the right piece of candy for the right person.
Wow.
Yes. So Bob was a little quirky, but he brought some levity to the office. Everybody loved working with Bob. One problem, Bob was doing terrible work. His work was riddled with sloppy mistakes. I was so puzzled. I couldn't understand what was going on because he had this incredible resume, this great history of accomplishments. I learned much later the problem was that Bob was smoking pot in the bathroom 3 times a day, which maybe explained all that candy that he had at all times.
Yeah.
But I didn't know any of that at the time. All I knew was that Bob was handing stuff in to me with shame in his eyes. And I would say something to him along the lines of, oh, Bob, this is a great start. You are so awesome. We all love working with you. Maybe you can make it just a little bit better, which of course he never did. So let's pause. What was I doing and why was I doing it? part of the reason I said something so that should have been so obviously ineffective was that I really did like Bob and I didn't want to hurt his feelings. That was the ruinous empathy part. But if I'm honest with myself, there was also something more insidious going on because Bob was sensitive and Bob was also popular. And so there was part of me that was afraid that if I told Bob in no uncertain terms that his work wasn't nearly good enough, he would get upset. He might even start to cry. And then everybody would think I was a big, you know what.
Yep.
And so the part of me that was worried about my reputation as a leader, that's the manipulative insincerity part.
Yep.
And this went on for, 10 months. And eventually the inevitable happened. And I realized that if I didn't fire Bob, I was going to lose all my best performers. Because not only have I been unfair to Bob by not telling him, I've been unfair to the whole team. Because other people are frustrated. Their deliverables are late when Bob's deliverables are late. They're not able to do their best work because they're having to spend so much time redoing Bob's work. And the people who are best at the job were going to quit. They were going to go someplace where they could do their best work. Because you know what? Most people want to do good work.
Yeah.
That's the great thing about people. And so I sat down to have a conversation with Bob that I should have begun 10 months previously. And finally, when I finished explaining to him where things stood, he kind of pushed his chair back from the table. He looked me right in the eye and he said, "Why didn't you tell me?"
Oh my gosh. Yep.
That question's going around in my head with no good answer. And then he looks at me again and he said, "Why didn't anyone tell me? I thought you all cared about me." Yeah.
Wow.
Such a bad moment. Bad for me, much worse for Bob, bad for the whole team, and bad for our investors because we weren't getting the results that we needed to get. But it was too late at that point to save Bob. At that point, all I could, because his reputation was shot, even he agreed he should go. All I could do is make myself a very solemn promise that I would never make that mistake again. And that's really why I wrote the book and came up with the framework and all the rest of it.
No, nice. I hope you gave credit to Bob somewhere in the book.
Yes. Bob, his name was not Bob.
Yeah, I realized that. Yeah, I realized that. I always was thought about political behavior.
Mm-hmm.
When you're being political, you're contemplating people's reaction to your words as the primary factor on what you say.
Yeah, instead of caring about them. Right?
Exactly. Yeah. My other thought, maybe just two other thoughts, and we'll move on, is at the bottom right. This is the Netflix rule, which is no brilliant jerks, right? Which is what that feels like to me, is like you're a jerk and you have no compassion and you're super direct and you're probably right a lot of the times, but oh my God, I don't feel any love at all when you say it, right?
Yeah. But it's very interesting. Bob Sutton wrote a book called The No Asshole Rule, and and he did a lot of research, and he found that on a team, very often a leader is afraid to fire that person who's being a jerk because they're getting stuff done.
They're brilliant, right? They're great.
But once you take them off the team, once you do fire them, if you wait till they will eventually cross some line. And then it was discovered that the team performed better without that so-called brilliant jerk, because even though that kind of obnoxious behavior maybe helps them succeed, but it makes everybody else fail just a little bit. And that does in aggregate more harm than good.
Maybe the last thought is, it would be interesting to see this model mapped over to parenting.
Yes.
Because I think there's been this trend of, oh my God, you're wonderful, you're a princess, you're a prince, you're fabulous, participation medal and blah, blah, blah. I mean, you completely stink, but we're going to right. But nobody will ever say that. I just wonder if it maps over to parenting in some interesting way.
Totally.
Right?
Yeah. To parenting, and I mean, to any it's about human relationships, really, not only the boss employee relationship, but as when you are leading a team, it's your job to tell people when they're messing, so they can fix it. And similarly, when you're a parent or when you're a coach, like I was watching my son's baseball practice when he was younger, and they were running bases. They were doing a drill, and this kid kept missing the base, and the coach was kind of telling him he was going further and further out on the challenge directly dimension. And the kid was kind of brushing him off. And finally, the coach kind of yelled, and the kid got all teary. And the coach stopped him, and he said, "Look, I'm telling you this because I want you to be a good ball player. And if you don't hit the bases, you won't, you know." And then he looks at this kid. He said, "You can't do right if you don't know what you're doing wrong." And I thought that was a great way to put it.
I love it. Awesome. Yeah. So that's your third book, right? Radical Candor and Parenting.
The house of radical candor.
Yeah, exactly. Radical Candor in the house.
Yeah.
So, you know, that book just did fabulously well. So congratulations.
Thank you.
It's not that easy to write something that sells that many copies. I know
it's not that easy to write a book that doesn't sell that many copies.
Well, agreed. I've written 2 books, and the whole process is the same, whether it's good or not so good, right?
Yeah, it's a labor of love.
No doubt. I tell people it's not that hard, but you need to be incredibly persistent.
Yes.
So that part is really hard. So success there, and obviously the work you do with CEOs and teams and whatnot. What brought you to this book, Radical Respect? Yeah.
Yes.
What caused you to get to this place? Because it's not completely linear between the 2 books in my estimation, but maybe I'm missing something.
No, you're right. So the reason I wrote, in many ways, Radical Respect is sort of the prequel to Radical Candor. Because if you don't respect someone, you're not going to bother challenging them, and it's hard to care about someone who you don't respect. And when I'm talking about respect, I'm talking about there's 2 definitions of respect, not the kind of respect you have to earn. Like, I have to earn your respect as a writer by writing a good book, for example. I don't get that without, but there's a second definition of respect, which is about unconditional regard for other people's feelings, emotions, for who they are, for their background, for their traditions. And it's that kind of unconditional regard that I'm talking about. We can disagree with each other. We can have an argument. I can hold you accountable. You can hold me accountable, all the while respecting each other. And that's the kind of respect that I'm talking about. And that is so often missing, I think, especially today, and in the way that we talk to each other. So, you know, if you write a book about feedback, you're bound to get a lot of it. And indeed I did. And the most helpful feedback that I got about Radical Candor is what prompted me to write this book, Radical Respect. I was doing a Radical Candor talk at a tech company in San Francisco, and the CEO of that company had been a colleague of mine for the better part of a decade. She's a person I like and respect enormously, and one of too few Black women CEOs in tech or in any other sector. And when I finished giving the talk, she pulled me aside and she said, "I'm excited to roll out Radical Candor, Kim. I think it's going to help me build the kind of culture that I need to be innovative. But," she said to me, "it's much harder for me to roll it out than it is for you." And she went on to explain to me that when she would offer people even the most gentle, compassionate criticism, they would call her an angry Black woman.
Oh my gosh.
And as soon as she said it, I knew it was true, and I knew how unfair it was. She's like one of the most cheerful, reasonable people I've ever worked with. And so when she said it, I had 4 different realizations at the same time. And these became kind of the 4 different chapters, the 4 first chapters of the book. First was that I had not been the kind of colleague that I imagined myself to be. I had not been an upstander. I'd been kind of a silent bystander. But that's not how I view myself. I want to be an upstander who intervenes when I see people getting treated unfairly, my colleagues or anybody.
Yep.
The second thing that I realized was that not only had I been in denial about what was happening to her, I'd also been in denial about a lot of the things that had happened to me as a woman in the workplace. Also hard for the author of a book called Radical Candor to admit that I've been pretending that a whole bunch of things were not happening. A whole bunch of disrespectful attitudes and behaviors were not happening to me that were in fact happening. And because I had pretended they weren't happening, I couldn't choose a response. I had sort of defaulted to silence, which is not not in the spirit of radical
Right.
candor.
It's certainly not curative, right?
Yeah. And then and I think I had done that because I never wanted to think of myself as a victim. I wanted to move forward. But the third thing that I realized was that even less than wanting to think of myself as a victim, did I want to think of myself as the culprit. And
Mm.
so I was most deeply in denial about the times when I was the one who had disrespectful attitudes and behaviors that made it harder for the people around me to get their work done than it needed to be. And I think that was probably the part of writing this book that I struggled with the most. But also, I was writing the book just as Me Too was heating up. And I sort of felt like I owed it to the world in particular to say, like, I make these mistakes. And as my son's baseball coach said, you can't do right if you can't admit to yourself what you're doing wrong. So I tried to tell a lot of stories about my own disrespectful attitudes and behaviors. And then the fourth, and probably this is where I really started the book with, the fourth thing I realized was that as a leader, because I was pretending that all this stuff was not happening, I couldn't prevent it from getting in my team's way. And I think it's your job really as a leader to recognize these things and not only recognize them, but to design your management system so that these problems, these disrespectful attitudes and behaviors don't get in the way of your team's willingness to, or an ability to get things done. And it's interesting, when I started my first software company back in 1999, a long time ago now, I sort of imagined, well, if I'm the founder and CEO, none of this BS that happened in other
Yeah.
places. Well, and of course, all that BS happened at my company.
Of course it does.
Yeah. I think we imagine as leaders that because we're in charge, human nature will change. And I got a newsflash, it does not. You have to, and if you don't design your management systems to be fair at every stage of the employee life cycle, then you're going to get systemic injustice every single time. You just will.
Got it. So let's go down that path, because I think the whole idea of let's have respect for all people in our organization and let's treat them all reasonably and fairly, that just feels like good values.
Yeah, why doesn't it always happen?
Right. So how as leaders do we create that environment so that does happen, which, to your point, feels a little bit like an unnatural act, right? The natural
Yes.
is to do this pit of vipers thing a little bit. So how do we do the unnatural act of actually being nice and respectful to each other?
Yeah. I think it's important to define what gets in the way and to define it pretty precisely. I mean, there's a million things that get in the way of radical respect. And so before we talk about problems, let's focus on positive target identification. A radically respectful workplace is one, I love a good 2x2 framework.
Oh, wait, another 2x2 grid. Awesome.
Is one that optimizes for collaboration and doesn't give in to coercion. I think hierarchy is inevitable, but you want a collaboration hierarchy, not a dominance hierarchy. Like a troop of baboons might need a dominance hierarchy, but we can do better. We're people, right?
Although I do say to people as the leader, you should not do it very frequently, but once in a while you can pull the boss card if you have to. Generally, you should avoid it, but sometimes you have to, and that's okay, right? So, but keep going. I agree. Collaboration, coercion is one answer. Sure.
Yeah, but that's the exception that proves the rule, that you're a collaborative, right? It's not the rule.
Yeah.
And then the other thing you need an organization that optimizes and honors everyone's individuality. Rather than demanding conformity. And I don't think there are many leaders who set out intentionally to create a dystopic, everybody must look the same, march in lockstep kind of work.
Some people have done it, but it hasn't turned out that great.
Yes, there are leaders, but I don't think anyone on this call, none of your listeners are those people.
I would hope not.
Yes. And because we know it doesn't work. In addition to being, morally problematic, it's brutal incompetence. That's what that is. It might work for a little while, but it's not going to work in the long term. So that's what we're shooting for. So what gets in the way? A million things get in the way, but I'm going to boil it down to three things: bias, prejudice, and bullying. And I think one of the mistakes we make is that we often conflate these three behaviors as though they're the same thing. And then it's hard to know how do you solve a hard problem? You break it down into its component parts. So let's take some simple definitions. Bias is not meaning it. I'm really talking about unconscious bias here.
Yep.
Prejudice is meaning it. Prejudice is a very consciously held belief, usually incorporating some kind of unfair and inaccurate stereotype. And finally, bullying. Bullying is just being mean. It's not about a belief, conscious or unconscious.
Yeah.
And so, how can we respond differently to these three things? And then what can we do about them as leaders? I think very often when we notice this happening in a meeting, and I want everybody to pause for a moment and think about that meeting you were in just this week where somebody said or did something that was so cringeworthy, it left you gobsmacked. You didn't know what to say, so you didn't say anything. And you just let the moment pass. Claudia Rankine wrote this great book and just said, the moment stinks, but you just ignore it. And that, ignoring a problem never solves it. So what can you say when you don't know what to say? If you think it is bias, start with an I statement. I don't think you meant that the way it sounded. One of my favorite stories comes from a friend of mine who was going into a meeting with two colleagues who were men, and she had the expertise that was going to win her team the deal. So she sat in the center of the table. Her two colleagues sat off to her left. And then when the other side, and they were at one of those big, long conference tables, small team meeting with a big company. And 20 people filed in. The first person sits across from the guy to her left. The next person sits across from the guy to his left. And you know what's happening. Everybody files on down the table, leaving her dangling by herself. And because she had the expertise that was going to win her team the deal, she started talking. And when the other side had questions, they started directing them at her two.
Of course, they direct them at the men.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure I've been in that meeting.
Yeah. I think we've all been in that meeting. Yeah. And finally, one of her colleagues stood up, a good upstander. He literally was an upstander. He stood up and he said, I think we should switch seats. That was all he had to do to totally change the dynamic in the room. He wasn't her boss. He wasn't a leader, but he was a great upstander in that moment. And so that was a literal I statement. I think we should switch seats. He wasn't calling anyone out. He was inviting them in to understand the situation from his perspective. And as soon as they realized what they were doing, he was kind of holding a mirror up. They knocked it off. They stopped doing it.
Yeah. But the symbolism of changing seats is massive.
Yeah,
he didn't need any more words than that. You're talking to the wrong person. You should be talking to her, right?
Yeah. But he didn't even have to say that explicit, And so I thought, I love that story. And so often an upstander like that can make a huge difference. So one of the things leaders want to do is they want to empower people to be upstanders, teach them how to use these I statements. Now, if it's prejudice, though, holding up a mirror is not going to work. Because the person is going to look in that mirror and they're going to grin. They're going to like what they see. They're going to be, that's what I think. Oof. And so it's harder. And so here's a different example of me encountering prejudice. But at first I thought it was bias. I had just returned to work after maternity leave. I'd given birth to twins, taken 5 months off, and second day back in the office, I was chit-chatting with a guy before a meeting, and he says to me, my wife doesn't work because it's better for the children, which of course at that moment was like a gut punch.
Yeah,
me,
right. I mean, I just left my babies and you're saying this to me.
Yeah,
oh my God. Yeah.
But I didn't think he meant it. So I tried an I statement first. And I said, I decided to show up at work today because I thought it'd be a good idea to neglect my children, And I was expecting him to have your response, to laugh.
That's great.
I
love humor.
Yeah.
I love humor to diffuse. Yeah, I love it.
It didn't work.
Wow.
He was like, oh no, he doubled down and said, he's like, oh no, Kim, you don't understand. It's really bad for your kids that you're back at work. And so now I know it's not bias, it's prejudice. He really believes this. And so in the case of prejudice, you want an it statement. An it statement draws a line between one person's freedom to believe whatever they want, but they can't impose those beliefs on others. And so I said, an it statement can appeal to the law, it can appeal to a company policy, or it can appeal to common sense. And in this case, I chose a company policy. And I said, it is an HR violation for you to tell me that I am neglecting my children, but you're creating a hostile work environment.
There you go. Yeah.
Yeah, and that had the desired impact. He kind of backed off and looked alarmed. And I said, look, I'm not going to over delegate this to HR. I'm not going to make a thing of it. But I think it is my decision, and we can agree on this. It is my decision to get, so now I'm going to appeal to common sense. It's my decision together with my partner how we raise our children, just as it is your decision together with your wife how you raise your children. And he kind of nodded, but it was kind of a half-hearted agreement. And so finally I said, and it's my guess you don't want to read my research any more than I want to read yours. And then he kind of laughed, and I said, look, it's great that you and I are not raising children together, but we do have to work together, you know? And so that was just using an it statement to say, to make it clear where that line was. He did not get to tell me how I raised my kids.
Sure. I don't think you changed his view, by the way.
I didn't need to.
And you weren't trying to, right?
Yeah,
You're just imposing my view is valid, and
yeah.
we can agree to disagree. That's it.
Yeah. I mean, if we if we had been trying to have kids together, then I would have needed to change his view. But we were not.
Or him to change yours. I mean, you could go both.
Yeah. We would have needed to have a deeper conversation. But that's the beauty of the it statement. It's because if someone has a prejudice, if someone has a belief, you don't really usually want to spend the energy that it would take to change that belief. That's really hard. And if you're their manager, it may be inappropriate for you to do so. Yep. So you want to allow space for people to believe whatever they want, but not to impose those beliefs. And it's easy for me to say there's a line between one person's freedom to believe whatever they want, but they can't impose it on others. Like each manager has got to sit down and think about where that line is on their team.
Interesting.
And using some specific examples can help. So that's so if it's bias, use an I statement. If it's prejudice, use an it statement. If it's bullying, though, an it statement is not going to work because a bully is going to try to kick past any boundary. Like that's the nature of bullying, is to kick past a boundary. And also an I statement, which brings someone in closer, is not what you want to do with someone who's bullying you. You want to push them away. My daughter taught me this in 3rd grade. She was getting bullied, and I was encouraging her to use an I statement, which is a mistake that we often use. And I said, tell this child, I feel sad when you blah, 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 blah. She banged her fist on the table and she said, Mom, they are trying to make me feel sad. Why would I tell them they succeeded? I'm like, oh, that's a good point.
That's an excellent point. Yes.
Yeah. So you can't talk to me like that, or sort of a you question. What's going on for you here? Why are you behaving this way? Or even a you non sequitur, like, where'd you get that shirt? The point is you're in an active stance. You're not taking whatever they're dishing out at you. You're making them answer to you. And that, I think, is you don't want to be in a submissive stance if someone is trying to bully you. So those are some simple, bias, not meaning it, respond with an I statement. Prejudice, meaning it, respond with an it statement. Bullying, being mean, respond with a you statement or question.
Love it. And really, as a leader, the answer is teach these tools to the people in our organization so they are self-managing around these 3 items to try to create that environment, right?
You want to teach that, and I think you need to do more as a leader. In the case of bias, you want to teach your team to disrupt bias in the moment. To use those I don't think you meant that the way it sounded kind of statements in the moment, because correcting bias in the moment that's not public criticism. It's a correction. It's like, again, I'm going to go back to baseball. If a kid is running from first to second, they need to go back. You yell back in the moment. You don't wait till after the game. If we don't correct bias in the moment, we reflect and reinforce it. It's going to keep happening. And it's an opportunity for everybody to learn. So if you normalize sort of disrupting bias in the moment, then you're going to have a lot more incidents like where that upstander said, I think we should switch seats. That people need to know that they're expected to do that, and you need to teach them. Like, you can sit down with your team and say, what's the word or phrase that we're going to use? And then you also need to teach people how to respond when they're the one who has said or done the biased thing, as we are all bound to do.
Yeah,
by
of
the way.
course.
This is, but you got to take shame out of the game, because it's very natural to feel ashamed. I mean, I don't know about you anyway, but when someone tells me I've said or done something biased, I feel it in the backs of my knees, tingling. It's the same physical sensation that I get if my children walk too close to the edge of a precipice.
Yeah.
It's a real fear response. And when we're in that mindset, our executive function has shut down, and we usually don't respond very well. And so we need to learn how to accept that we have done something that we're not proud of. But, you know, again, you can't do right if you don't know what you did wrong. So learning how to say, thank you for pointing it out. Either I get it and I'm working on not doing it again, or I don't get it. And that second thing is really hard to say. Now I'm doubly ashamed. I'm ashamed because I've hurt someone else, and I'm ignorant. I don't know what I did wrong. And yet, especially if you have teenage children, they're going to tell you about some things you're saying or doing that you had no idea were problematic. And get curious about it. Figure out why they're thinking that.
Yeah.
So that's sort of disrupting bias. In the case of prejudice, sit down with your team and do some pre-mortems on, think about things that have gone badly off the rails at other companies and say, how would we handle this? There's a few examples in the book, Radical Respect, that I give.
Yep.
And in the case of bullying, it's your job as a leader to create consequences for bullying. Conversational consequences, obviously, if you notice it happening in a meeting. But also, there've got to be compensation consequences. You cannot give, or you can, but you make a big mistake if you give high ratings or pay bonuses to people who bully others, because now you're rewarding that behavior, and it's just going to escalate. And last but not least, there need to be career consequences. Whatever you do, do not promote someone who tends to bully others. There comes a moment on too many teams' history when the jerks begin to win. And that is the moment when the culture begins to lose, and performance will soon follow suit. It will also begin to lose.
Yeah. I deal with one company where this has happened. The bully is the CEO, and he is a bully by any stretch. And it's a reign of terror. Yeah. It's horrible. People are scared to death in that place.
And that really hurts. They hide mistakes instead of fixing them. It's bad. It's bad. It's not only bad for people, but it's bad for results. In the long run, it can work for a little while, as you know, as we've seen too often. So if you have someone on your team who bullies others, let them know that if they can't change that behavior, it will be a career limiting move. They will never get promoted. And in fact, eventually they'll get fired. If they can't change their behavior, no matter how crucial you think whatever it is they're doing is. Like, it's better to have a hole than an asshole on your team. So.
Oh, I like that. I may steal that idea. Well, hey, Kim, I could talk to you for 5 hours, but unfortunately we have a limit on how long we have today. So we're going to sort of end on that topic. And
that's a good note to end on.
A hole instead of an a-hole. I love it. That's great. If people want more Kim in their life, how would they find you?
So go to radicalcandor.com, and we have all kinds of resources there. You'll also find our podcast and our blog and various courses that we've created. And you can send us questions. If you have management dilemmas, you can anonymize it, and we'll talk about it on our podcast. We love dilemmas.
I love it. And then don't forget to grab her newest book, Radical Respect, there.
Yes. You can also click through to buy Radical Respect.
There you go.
Radical
Awesome.
Candor, selling both of them. Or anywhere you like to, you can go to your local independent bookseller, anywhere you like to buy books.
Love it. Kim, thank you so much. This was outstanding and fun and insightful, and I really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you. Really enjoyed the conversation.
All righty. See you next time on the Lazy CEO Podcast. This podcast is brought to you by the CEO Project. At the CEO Project, we work with CEOs to help them grow their business. And our members represent billions of dollars of revenue and profit. And frankly, amongst all of us, we've probably made every mistake in the book, including some you haven't made yet. So if you want to learn from the experience of a bunch of really seasoned CEOs, we're a great place to hang out. In this podcast, what you're going to hear are some of those ideas, concepts, and things that are just going to help you on your journey. If you want to find out more, reach out to us at theceoproject.com, or you can contact me personally at jim@theceoproject.com. Happy listening.
Thanks for listening to the Lazy CEO Podcast. We'll see you next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes, and check out our website, www.theceoproject.com.